Perhaps one of the most fascinating things about the DC animated universe has always been its world building. Beginning in 1992 with Batman the Animated Series, this universe still runs to this day, encompassing 8 TV shows, 6 movies, and a whole slew of other tie-in material, including comics, video games, web series, novels, and if you want the full lore experience, even the backs of action figure packaging. Of course, with a universe this massive, retcons, contradictions, and general continuity errors abound. For instance, while Justice League, the animated series that introduced this world to the Justice League, didn't begin airing until 2001, the team actually first appeared in the pages of Superman and Batman magazine #1, dated summer of 1993. Since this was during Batman the Animated Series' original broadcast schedule, much of the information within this series was obviously overwritten by the TV crew in years to come. However, while we often do focus on these discrepancies in our content through our Will It Canon series, this video is specifically focusing on the DCAU's Flash Museum. All 3 of them.
Showtime, everybody!
Engagement.
They can talk all they like.
That means everything.
Don't forget that.
You heard it, folks!
You see, while the Flash wasn't introduced to the on-screen DCAU canon until September of 1997 in Superman the Animated Series episode Speed Demons, he was a part of that much earlier league I just mentioned from Superman and Batman magazine. And in issue number 8, we got our first glimpse of a DCAU adjacent Flash museum. From this issue, we learned that Wally was actually the proto-DCAU's 3rd Flash, following Jay Garrick and Barry Allen. And from the fact that his statue is a new addition to the museum, we can assume it was built before he ever took on the Flash mantle. Unfortunately, we don't get to see too much of the museum other than these statues, an artist representation of the accident in Barry's lab that gave Wally his powers, another image of the 2 racing side by side, and a couple other images from Flash history that are impossible to make out while Wally zips past them. Of interesting note, during this sequence, Wally mentions that Barry had sacrificed himself to save all of reality, suggesting that the events of Crisis on Infinite Earths are canon, at least to this version of the DCAU. But much like Crisis booted many universes out of existence, Justice League Unlimited would kick this Flash museum out of existence with the 2006 episode Flash and Substance. And this is where that world building I was talking about earlier starts coming into play. As I'm sure the majority of you are aware, the DC animated universe as a whole was built off the stepping stones of Batman the Animated Series and Superman the Animated Series. In time, this would lead to an animated Justice League series. But while 2 of the team's 7-person roster were well-established heroes in this world, the other 5 didn't have their own series beforehand. For characters like Wonder Woman and Martian Manhunter, this meant their origins would be dealt with during the show's introductory episode. But for the other 3 characters, the audience was asked to momentarily suspend disbelief and assume that they had all been operating off-screen for an unknown amount of time. This was easy enough. After all, Superman the Animated Series did have a guest appearance from The Flash and a Green Lantern, not to mention many other guest appearances from established characters that never got their own origin stories in universe. However, since Flash, Hawkgirl, and Green Lantern John Stewart were now main recurring cast members, it did raise a lot of questions about each one's history in this world. More or less, throwaway lines would be peppered into episodes as a way to fill in the gaps.
Hawkgirl, what's she doing here?
But while Shiera's tale eventually unfolded during the Star-Crossed story arc, it wasn't until season 3 of Justice League Unlimited that the showrunners decided to really round out Wally West's history via an entire treasure trove of Easter eggs in the now on-screen canon Flash Museum. Perhaps the most discussed nuggets in this whole sequence are the Kid Flash costume and what seems to be Jay Garrick's helmet. I say seems to be because it's still kind of up for debate as to whether or not that really is an indicator of Jay's existence in this universe. On the one hand, tie-in material such as the 12th issue of the show's tie-in comic, also titled Justice League Unlimited, stars Jay, who's said to be this world's first Flash and the inspiration for Wally. But on the other hand, in 2010, series producer Dwayne McDuffie stated that in this continuity, only two Flashes exist. The one we know from the Justice League and the unknown Kid Flash, whose costume we see here in the museum. When asked more directly about the inclusion of Jay's helmet in regard to not including him in his previous answer, McDuffie concluded that it could be explained away in many ways and elaborated by saying, "It's not Jay's helmet. It belongs to Hermes. It's from an old Wally Flash costume. It's a trophy from a completely unrelated adventure and has nothing to do with any Flash costume whatsoever, etc. The only reason you think it's Jay is because you know about Jay. 95% of the audience have never heard of him and don't care. If we wanted it to be Jay's, it would be just as easy to bring into continuity, but we didn't say either way." Personally, I'm going to say that it's not Jay's helmet, but only because we have a track record of saying a thing doesn't exist in this world, only for it to become canonized later on. And I would sure love to see how they would shove in Jay Garrick. I think it's probably about time we got a DCAU Flash movie, right? As for the Kid Flash costume, over the years, many fans have taken this as a nod to the Teen Titans animated series being canon to the DCAU, a theory that we've covered on the channel before and concluded that despite cast and crew having suggested there were plans for crossovers between that show and DCAU shows like Static Shock and Justice League, it doesn't really pan out. Not to mention, these Kid Flashes are totally not the same. I mean, I know I bring up hair-based theories pretty often, but look at these and tell me they're the same. You can't. And while we're still on the topic of heroes, Superman is also represented in the museum with an exhibit memorializing his race against the Flash as seen in the aforementioned Superman the Animated Series episode Speed Demons, which in and of itself was a nod to the many times the Man of Steel and the Scarlet Speedster have raced in the comics, going all the way back to Superman number 199 from 1967. Fun fact, this episode actually wasn't the first time the race was portrayed in the DCAU. That actually occurred a year earlier, shortly before Superman the Animated Series began, in the pages of an animated style Golden Book, where the two went up against Vandal Savage. This was later knocked out of continuity by multiple on-screen events, so perhaps it's best to think of it as part of that post-crisis version of the DCAU we touched on earlier. Back in the main DCAU, this Fastest Man Alive exhibit includes a globe featuring miniature versions of our heroes racing around it, a photo of the two, and if you look very closely, you can see the Trickster hiding out in the corner. But don't tell James, he may have another meltdown rant over it, and nobody wants that, right?
Everybody wants that.
Of course, now that I mentioned the Trickster, it's probably about time we started checking out the villains. These displays seem to keep blinking in and out of existence during our time in the museum, so it was a little complicated to track them down, but I think we've got all of them.
Thanks, yo.
So this is a part of the video where we have a Patreon party. I saw Ted do one outside in his hammock, and I figured, hey, kind of used up all of my different places in my apartment that I could. It's been a weird 6 months with this whole pandemic thing. Thinking about that a lot, because Thanksgiving's coming up. Can't really get together with our loved ones without the possibility of putting them in perilous danger. But with Thanksgiving in mind, I'm thankful for you all being around, helping and supporting us. I don't want to play favorites. I'm even more thankful for those of you who have been supporting us monetarily. All three of us, me, James, Ted, we all lost our jobs at the start of this. This is what we do now. Despite everything that's been going on around me, I'm very thankful for all of you. I feel like I don't get to say that a lot on the channel anymore since Vanishing Point ended. I greatly appreciate appreciate each one of y'all for giving us the time of day. As much as I appreciate every single one of you, this is the Patreon party. A couple new patrons who have joined us. William Birch, thanks for coming along. Zavi Golden, hey, appreciate you. Ty Star, I imagine that's some kind of mix between Star-Lord and Tyson frozen food products. Thanks for hanging out with us, being a patron. Matteo Kunzer, I'm hoping I'm pronouncing this. Maybe it's Mateo Kunzer. Thanks for becoming a patron. And of course, the last of the new patrons, homie Edward Hammond. I met Ed via our Discord channel. Link to that is below. Ed is a super talented artist. We've been talking about possibly doing some OC stuff for a comic or something together. You can check out Ed's art on Instagram, E_H_art. There's probably some of it on the screen right now. Dude is a talent. Should be working for one of the big publishers. Definitely go support him. And thank you once again, Ed, and everyone else on the list for supporting us. These last couple people are people who give us way too much money. We've gotten to a point with these people, kind of have personal relationships with them and in-jokes and stuff, because part of the Patreon perks is once a month, we all hop on a Zoom call together and just chat with each other. And there's tons of inside jokes and everything. We try to say these people's names every single chance we get because we just greatly appreciate the amount of support that you've been giving us, the years that some of y'all have been patrons for us. I want to go ahead and give a shout out to Robert Meatball Sterling, Aaron Young, Cameo Shadowness, Cody Hazel Malik, Luke Mears, Mac, who watches us stream while he's riding around in a Tesla sometimes and sends us photos of it, and of course, the late, the great Richard Mon 12. We greatly appreciate everything that you guys do for us. We're glad that you guys appreciate the content that we put out. It's been a wild ride. 5 years that we've been doing Watchtower Database, and you know, we never expected to be where we are. On top of those Zoom calls, we also have tons of other perks over there on the Patreon. Custom artwork, early access to videos, voting and polls to help us choose one of our video topics a month, a whole bunch of stuff. If you're interested in just seeing what's going on over there, you can go to patreon.com/DCAU Watchtower. It costs you nothing to at least check it out. Love you all. I'm gonna throw it back to the me talking about the Flash Museum. Mwah. Kisses. Once this all is over, kiss your dads for me.
Big burst of flavor in every bite. Yeah!
Starting on the left side of the hall, we see a father and son duo checking out a display featuring Gorilla Grodd with the mind control device he used during the Justice League episode The Brave and the Bold. As they continue to make their way through the museum, we see the Pied Piper display complete with a replica of his signature trumpet, the Trickster along with his iconic tricycle from the cover of Flash number 152, Captain Boomerang along with a giant boomerang, as well as one of his authentic boomerang weapons, which one could assume may have been lifted during his time in Task Force X. Past Boomerang is Weather Wizard, who, despite last being seen in Hereafter plotting revenge on Superman, seems to be recognized in universe as more of a Flash rogue like his comic book counterpart. In fact, he also shows up elsewhere in the museum as part of a statue depicting a 2-on-1 fight between him and the Top versus Flash. The Top is also seen elsewhere in the museum, right across from Weather Wizard and underneath a giant spiked spin top. The last villain we get a decent look at is Turtle Man, who's a bit further down the hall past the Captain Boomerang statue.
Aw, Boomer, not the Turtle Man display!
There are a few more villains represented in the museum, but they're all a bit harder to identify. If you look closely, in some shots you can see the backs of another row of statues situated behind the row with Captain Boomerang and Weather Wizard. One of them, seen here, seems to match Dr. Alchemy, who we see earlier in this episode hiding out in the Rogues Bar. Another in that row, located directly behind Captain Boomerang, is a bit harder to make out. Just based on the cape's color, one could easily assume it's the Trickster, but given that we've seen him elsewhere in the museum, and what little bit we see of this statue's head is smooth rather than spiky, I'm more inclined to believe it's another villain we saw at the bar, Cadabra. Sure, the colors are wrong, but it wouldn't be the first time we've seen that in the DCAU. Elsewhere, you'll notice that the walls of the museum are covered in the Flash's symbol, but some of them look a bit different than the lightning bolt we see displayed on the Wally we know and love. This one in particular looks to be the symbol of the Reverse Flash. Well, kinda. The bolt is mirrored from the typical Reverse Flash symbol and actually more closely resembles the bolt we would typically see on Barry Allen. But in red. So it's kind of like Kid Flash's costume, though that doesn't feature the circle we see with the symbol on the wall. So for the sake of not spending 20 hours on it, let's just split the difference and say Barry Allen is Reverse Flash, is Kid Flash, and not think about the implications that may have on the larger lore. It's canon and you can't disagree. I have the power to make this declaration. Deal with it. Before wrapping up this iteration of the Flash Museum, there are a small handful of other items I haven't mentioned yet, including a plaque featuring an image of the Flash with the mayor that reads, "Central City welcomes the Flash," a replica of a Justice League javelin, and these two purple items that for the life of me, I cannot identify. One of our Twitter followers suggested that the feather may be part of a quill and ink set that belonged to Dr. Alchemy, and while I'm inclined to believe that, based on the fact it's right across from his statue, I haven't been able to pinpoint any time in the comics that he used one of these. As for the purple planet, your guess is as good as mine. We tried to ask for help on Twitter, and series producer James Tucker gave us a little bit of interesting info that a different James is gonna put on the screen during the edit, but it didn't quite narrow things down. If you've got any idea about either of these, I'd love to hear it so I can stop wondering myself. Feel free to drop a comment and call me a fake fan once you've flipped through the whole Flash publication history and figured it out. Thanks. Now, as I mentioned at the top, there are actually 3 different Flash museums in DCAU lore, or you know, DCAU adjacent lore. This last one, the most recent of the 3, came about as part of the Beyond titles that debuted about a decade ago. Does that make me feel old? These books were sort of DCAU in that the vast majority of Batman Beyond media beforehand was the cartoon show and its tie-in merchandise, and as a result, it pulled a lot of cues from that world's history, but steered heavily into mainstream comics at times as well. We did a whole video on that previously, which you can check out here. So while this iteration of the museum doesn't 100% fall into DCAU canon, it is DCAU inspired at the very least. I mean, from the outside, they almost look identical, give or take a second floor. In this version of the future, the Flash mantle is now taken up by Danica Williams, an employee at the Flash Museum. While we don't see much of the museum's interior, there are display cases featuring the suits from previous rogues, including Captain Cold, Shade, Weather Wizard, and Mirror Master. And across from them, a case of weapons, including a boomerang, one of Grodd's mind control helmets, and what appears to be a wand, perhaps another nod to Abracadabra, or maybe the Weather Wizard. Another view of the display case adds Captain Boomerang's costume, as well as another purple item whose origin is, once again, unclear. Ted, one of our other contributors, thinks he's narrowed it down to either the Thinker, a miscolored heatwave, or potentially a more obscure villain named the Wasp, who was more so a rogue to the obscure speedster, Max Mercury, who was originally named Quicksilver, but had to be renamed in the 90s as to avoid confusion with Magneto's son. And if you look really closely, the helmet on this costume does resemble Magneto's helmet slightly, so I buy it. But also, Max is featured a few issues later in this page full of speedsters, so it's totally possible that they put reference to him elsewhere in the series. And that's it. That's everything in the DCAU Flash museums. You know, when I got the impulse to make this video, I figured it'd be quick, something I could zoom on through and get written up in a flash. But writing all those speed puns in the last sentence took almost as long as researching everything else. Luckily, like I mentioned earlier in the video, whenever we come across puzzlers like all those purple guys, we've got you all to fall back on. And while your collective comic book knowledge doesn't always get us to the right conclusions, it really does help get the wheels turning to pull strings we may not have thought of beforehand. So instead of just liking and commenting and subscribing and all the other YouTube prompts that typically come at the end of a video, I wanted to go ahead and plug all of our other social media outlets so you can keep connected with us even on days that we don't have a new video. If you're on Twitch, Discord, Twitter, Instagram, or even Facebook. They're all great ways to keep up with us. We'll put links in the description box beneath this video, but for the most part, you can probably find us on all of them by searching either DCAU Watchtower or Watchtower Database. You know, going through the entire Flash museum has kind of reminded me how much I love the Flash, and I would love to actually go through all of his appearances in the DCAU and maybe do a full Flash story video digging into his background between the time he becomes the Flash up to where we see him in Justice League. So if that's something that you guys would think is cool, you should definitely share this around so that we know it's worthwhile. I've been a Flash fan for a while. There's video of me crowd surfing as the Flash is probably on screen right now from a show I played with Law Dispute back in like 2012. And I wore that Flash costume for many Halloweens afterwards until another friend of mine decided they wanted to wear it and busted the zipper. Before I go, another huge thanks to all of our patrons who have been helping support us. Their names are probably zipping by on screen right now, and if you want to be among them, you can head on over to patreon.com/DCAU Watchtower to figure out how. I'll give you a hint. I probably explained it earlier in the video at a time code that's flashing on the screen right now. That's the hint. With all of that out of the way, as always, I've been Matty Washburn, and you've been watching Watchtower Database. We'll continue to stay those things so long as you continue to stay you. Boom, bomb, pow.